The fateful birthday dinner in Asheville. If you've never experienced a Southern dinner party, particularly one honoring a matriarch's birthday in Asheville, North Carolina, let me paint you a picture. The evening light filters through large bay windows, casting a warm honey gold over the sprawling colonial-style dining room. Polished mahogany gleams beneath flickering candlelight, while porcelain plates imported from Diane's favorite boutique in Charleston rest atop monogrammed napkins folded with military precision. There's the subtle scent of rosemary, baked ham, and the faintest whisper of Diane's signature Chanel perfume, an olfactory hint that everything tonight must be, if not perfect, at least performative. We arrived right on time, as the South is not a place that tolerates lateness, especially not in the Mercer household. Haley, my wife, gave my hand a gentle squeeze before we stepped up to the slate steps, her expression a cocktail of anticipation and dread. As for me, I still had dust from Montana in the seams of my coat, and a fatigue settled deep in my bones from a week of chasing bison in sub-zero wind for National Geographic. But I'd promised Haley, just a couple of hours, one birthday song, and we could slip away. Diane greeted us at the door, her smile carefully calibrated, generous for Haley, a touch more reserved for me. That unspoken measuring up never fails to make my collar itch. Gerald, my father-in-law, stood by the fireplace with a crystal tumbler balanced authoritatively in his hand, regaling Owen and Vanessa, Haley's brother and sister-in-law, with the latest tale of market conquests. I've always found it bizarre that a man could talk about hedge funds with the same zeal some reserve for SEC championships. Dinner itself was a study in rituals, Diane fussing over every fork, Gerald playing inquisitor about my earnings. How's that little photography business paying these days? And Haley's hand, a lifeline, anchored beneath the table atop mine whenever her parents' questions got a little too sharp. The meal ran like a well-oiled train on tracks I'd come to know too well. Roasted lamb with mint jelly, raucous laughter from Owen about golfing mishaps, Vanessa's carefully rehearsed stories about her promotion at a local hospital, all the while the air buzzing with implied comparisons. But the real moment of the evening, the quirk that would upend everything, happened just after the plates were cleared. Diane, with the theatrical air of a Food Network host, announced, "Now, who's ready for my famous sangria? I made a special recipe this year, just for our favorite son-in-law." She winked in my direction, her lipstick flawless, but I saw the tremor in her fingers as she gathered glasses. I offered to help, still playing the dutiful guest. The kitchen doors swung shut behind us, muffling the drone of Gerald's market anecdotes, and there, amidst the clatter and hum of the dishwasher, a tableau in miniature played out. Diane carefully pouring sangria into 2 crystal goblets, one clearly set apart from the rest. She reached into her apron, unscrewed a tiny vial and drizzled its unseen contents into the glass she nudged toward me. Her body language was all nervous business, her eyes darting to the little kitchen window as if worried she'd be caught. "Oh, Julian, you deserve something a little extra tonight for putting up with us Mercers," she said with a smile I can only describe as strange sugar. I thanked her. Years of freelancing have taught me how to hold my face neutral on the job, even when a wild bear is 10 feet away. What's a tense mother-in-law compared to that? Still, my pulse thrummed, something dark and twisting slid in beneath the warmth of the occasion. As I stepped out carrying both glasses, I made the quick surgical exchange, placing the suspicious one in front of Gerald instead. Part of me wanted to believe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was reading too much into a family that relished their secrets with as much gusto as Diane did her heirloom silver. But years of working behind a lens teaches you not to ignore details, especially when the stakes are hidden behind a smile. That was the night when the fault lines in our family finally cracked wide, and trust, once shaken, would prove nearly impossible to piece back together. But in that moment, surrounded by cut crystal and old grudges, none of us yet knew what the next hour would bring. Early signs and the first flickers of doubt. The awareness didn't begin as a thunderclap, it was more of a shiver, barely perceptible even to myself. Returning from Montana that week where bison and bitter wind were my only companions, I stepped into Diane's birthday dinner already off balance. My face still stung from the cold, my mind lagged behind the obligatory smiles and southern pleasantries. There was that tiny, persistent voice deep in my gut, the one I'd learned to trust after years spent waiting for wild things to reappear through a camera lens. Something was off, it whispered. Not just tonight, always, but especially now. It started with Diane's voice when she greeted us at the door, just a beat too rehearsed, her greeting overly sweet, her gaze darting to Haley and back to me as if assessing a threat. I registered the way her hands lingered too long on my shoulder, a show for the others, or the way she swept Haley away almost instantly with some excuse about helping in the kitchen, separating us with the ease of someone folding napkins. The casual questions about my Montana trip felt weighted, almost like traps carefully baited. Would I confess it was hard to make ends meet as a freelancer? Would I express anxiety about the next paycheck? I deflected, but behind each smile lay a calculation on Diane's part, like she was scripting not just the evening, but my role in her daughter's life. During dinner, Gerald's casual jabs at my job stung more than usual. He'd always masked condescension as teasing, but tonight he lingered, pressing details about finances, client lists, plans for a real future. As he spoke, Diane watched both of us, her expression unreadable but intent. I found myself studying her lips, the set of her jaw, small signals I'd usually ignore now magnified in the hush of the meal. Even the way Diane set the table suggested intent. There was only one glass with a different cut, a crystal goblet among the ordinary wine stems, placed directly in the seat she'd assigned me. The napkins, always folded with military precision, seemed to edge toward me like an accusation. Maybe I was imagining it, I told myself. After all, I'd survived wild bears and broken axles and icy rivers. Surely I could handle a difficult mother-in-law. But when Diane ushered us into the kitchen under the guise of dessert, her tone and the quick tremor in her fingers finally sent a jolt through me. She poured the sangria as if casting a spell. I caught a glimpse of a tiny vial in her hand, saw the way she concealed it in the shadows of the pantry. Her smile was too wide, her words a touch too warm. "This is just for you, Julian, my favorite son-in-law." I thanked her, masking confusion with a smile of my own, but by then, suspicion was crackling through my veins. Even as I went through the motions, taking the glass, making polite conversation, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The warning wasn't just about one night anymore. It was a realization that the game had changed and I was already a move behind. I had no proof, only a premonition, but the unease was no longer deniable. It was as if every moment in that house had been leading right here, to this single glass, its surface perfectly smooth, hiding something I couldn't yet see. The harsh boundaries of prejudice. From the earliest days of dating Haley, the lines her family had drawn were sharp and sometimes invisible to outsiders. For me, they were as physical and unforgiving as barbed wire. Gerald, my father-in-law, never made a secret of it. He had expectations for his only daughter's life and the man she'd marry. "You know, Julian, stability is everything," he'd said, the first time I had dinner with them. He smiled as he passed me a platter of roast chicken, but his words bit at the edges, cold beneath a layer of polite southern hospitality. "People in this world, son, end up as pillars or as burdens. You gotta know which one you are, or aren't." Their home itself was a monument to this worldview. Sprawling white columns, a driveway lined with neatly trimmed boxwoods, a brass mailbox shiny enough to see your own unease reflected back. Walking up those steps always felt like presenting myself at a job interview I'd already failed but couldn't refuse. Inside, Diane always greeted me with gracious warmth, but it never touched her eyes. She was a master of the dual-edged compliment, the kind of person who could admire the composition of my latest wildlife photo, then ask just as sweetly if I'd ever considered teaching photography at the community college for a more regular paycheck. At every milestone, it seemed, there was a subtle but deliberate effort to press me against the boundaries of what Gerald and Diane considered respectable. When Haley landed her fellowship, Gerald beamed and called her practical and wise. When I announced a magazine spread, his response was a thinly veiled question about whether I'd finally found a staff job yet. He never understood, or maybe he refused to understand, the adrenaline and art and chaos that fueled freelance life. The hunger to keep chasing light, wildness, and stories. Holidays were particularly tough. Sometimes at Christmas I'd catch Diane whispering on the phone, lamenting to a friend or relative how Haley had chosen the creative one instead of Thomas the orthopedic surgeon, as if creativity were an illness one might eventually recover from. During Thanksgiving dinner, Gerald's toast would include a backhanded reference about earning a living in the real world. It was so expertly wrapped in good-natured ribbing that most people missed the malice, but Haley always saw it. Her fingers would find mine beneath the table, a silent squeeze, a lifeline. Each time I told myself to let it go. But the cumulative effect was exhausting. There were smaller, sometimes pettier examples too. family group photos, where I'd be asked to operate the camera instead of stand in front of it. Social gatherings where I was introduced not as Haley's husband but Julian, the photographer. If I shared news of a big assignment like the bison in Yellowstone for National Geographic, Diane would smile indulgently and Gerald would say, "That's neat. But do you ever think about what happens when you want a family? That sort of life isn't really sustainable, you know?" All of this created invisible rifts, distancing me not just from their approval but from their sense of belonging. I tried to ignore those lines. I tried to erase them with gestures and words. Top-shelf wine at holidays, complimentary family portraits, tickets to my gallery openings. But each effort landed with a thud of polite gratitude and a subtle return to formality the next time. No matter how many walls I climbed, more seemed to rise in their place. By year 3 of our marriage, it felt like I was living in a permanent audition, caught in a play where the role I wanted, that of trusted son-in-law, would forever be out of reach. The prejudice wasn't loud, but it was relentless. And though Haley reassured me over and over that her love and commitment didn't depend on her parents' approval, the lines Gerald and Diane drew, what counted as success, what deserved respect, remained, dividing not just me, but all the ways our lives could intertwine as family. The sweet trap in the kitchen. After the main course, the energy at the table began to shift, the nerves settling into my bones. Diane, always the consummate hostess, played her part so flawlessly it was hard to tell where kindness ended and calculation began. Plates clinked and conversations drifted, but underneath it all was an anxious current I couldn't shake. As guests lingered over the remnants of lamb and the toast marks on expensive china, Diane rose with just the right amount of flair. "Time for my famous sangria," she declared, her southern lilt practiced to perfection. She gathered empty glasses on her tray, flashed a benevolent smile around the table, and then turned to me with sparkling eyes. "Julian, would you be a dear and help me in the kitchen?" I agreed out of routine, but inside, every instinct sharpened. I followed Diane into the kitchen, the swinging door swaying shut and muting the ambiance behind us. Her posture changed immediately, shoulders a touch more rigid, her smile thinner and slightly forced. The kitchen, a space bright with granite and gleaming appliances, was suddenly much too quiet. I noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands shook faintly as she reached for 2 crystal goblets that stood apart from the rest, their design a bit different, as if purposely chosen for a secret toast. She busied herself at the counter, deliberately turning her body to obscure my line of sight. Through the polished surface of one of the overhead cabinets, I caught the distorted reflection of her next movements. Diane reached into her apron pocket, withdrew a tiny glass vial, and poured a few drops of some clear, mysterious substance into only one glass. Her motions were swift but not invisible to someone used to watching for the subtlest movement through a camera's lens. The vial vanished back into the pocket in a single practiced gesture. It was a strange theater. Her tone, ever so bright, didn't mask the tremor in her words as she placed the 2 glasses on the counter, one very deliberately nearer to me. "Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law," Diane trilled, holding my gaze too long, waiting perhaps for hesitation or fear. "Made this just for you." A chill traced my spine. The glass intended for me caught the kitchen light just barely, revealing a thin, iridescent film at its surface, so slight only the paranoid or the trained would have seen it. I mustered a steady smile, drawing on years of maintaining composure in the wild and the unpredictable. "Thanks, Diane," I replied, my voice betraying nothing. I picked up both glasses casually, feigning hospitality. "Let me help carry these out." Her eyes narrowed, just for an instant. There was a battle of intentions in the silence, a single misstep and the whole masquerade would collapse. I wondered if she realized I'd seen everything. The moment was brief, but it told me what I needed to know. This wasn't a game. I could feel the web tightening around me, silky and almost invisible. The night of illness and guilty eyes. 45 minutes after the sangria was served, a subtle shift swept through the Mercer dining room. Everything, piecing together memories later, happened so quickly, yet for me, every frame stretched in slow motion. Gerald, who moments before had been holding court at the head of the table, recounting some tale about the stock market with faint self-congratulation, suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His voice wavered, hands gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles whitened. A bead of sweat snaked down his temple, glistening in the soft gold of the chandelier. It was Haley who noticed first. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, leaning across the table, concern etched on her brow. But Gerald, prideful as ever, tried to wave her away. "Must be something I ate," he managed. But the facade slipped almost instantly. He was trembling now, sweat caking the collar of his pale blue Oxford. Diarrhea, nausea, faintness, they overtook him all at once. With a strangled apology, Gerald clambered up, nearly knocking over a wineglass as he lurched from his chair. Seconds later he disappeared down the hallway, the door to the guest bathroom slamming shut behind him. It was chaos that followed. Vanilla-scented candles flickered in the draft, the spread of an elaborate meal gone cold. Haley scrambled after her father, nerves frayed, her voice calling from the corridor. Vanessa jumped up to help, confusion and worry flitting across her features. Owen, momentarily frozen, finally snapped out of it, murmuring something about food poisoning under his breath. Amid the turmoil I noticed Diane's stillness, so abrupt it was almost unnatural. The mask of a gracious hostess had slipped, and on her face flickered for the briefest second a look of pure, unfiltered fear. My gaze met Diane's across the scattered dishes, over the untouched birthday cake, beyond the half-empty pitcher of sangria. She was clutching her napkin so tightly in her lap I could see her knuckles straining. Her eyes glistened, wild and raw, darting to the kitchen and then back to mine as if counting the exits in her own home. There was no confusion, no pretense at innocent concern, just sharp, naked guilt. She pressed her lips together, carefully averting her gaze the moment she realized I was observing her. I had seen enough pairs of guilty eyes in my years documenting animal behavior to know what posturing looks like in a cornered creature. The same rigid poise, the same pulse beating beneath the skin. I made no move to confront her. There was no point. Not until I understood the rules of whatever secret game we were now playing. As the family's attention swung back and forth between the bathroom and the dinner table, I kept my movements slow and intentional. Reaching under the table, I retrieved the untouched glass, the one with the faint, oily sheen across its surface. I slipped it into my coat pocket when no one was watching, the chilled curve of the crystal pressing against my side like a secret kept safe. While Haley fussed over her father and Diane blurted out explanations, bad shellfish, stress, anything but the truth, I excused myself with the same calm neutrality I reserved for photographing wary predators. I knew then and there that boundaries had shifted. Diane looked at me as I rose, jaw clenched, her breath uneven. There was a silent threat there, but also a flicker of something pleading. I sat back down at the table and let the world swirl around me. I took a bite of the chocolate birthday cake, the taste suddenly metallic on my tongue. A cold anger settled in my chest, not explosive or dramatic, but a steely conviction. Diane and I exchanged one last glance, and in that look was all the confirmation I'd needed. She had done this, and she knew I knew. The games, whatever they had been, were over. A new, far more dangerous game was about to begin. Seeking the truth in the laboratory. The next morning, my mind barely rested after the whirlwind of the night before. I found myself standing in front of the cool gray doors of Jason's laboratory, a place more at home among cold solvents and buzzing fluorescent lights than family drama. Jason and I went way back. He was an old friend and a forensic toxicologist, the kind of person who could stare down a page of chemical readouts and find a story hidden in the spikes and valleys. Clutching the crystal goblet swaddled in a soft towel, I felt almost absurd. Years ago we would have shared beers and jokes after midnight, not boot prints of sedatives and questions about criminal intent. "You really want to test this?" Jason said with a half grin, but I could read the seriousness in his eyes. He never asked too many questions when I called in a favor, one of the reasons I trusted him. I placed the goblet on the steel table. The faint, oily residue that had clung to its rim now seemed to glow under the unforgiving white lights. I tried to keep my voice steady to sound casual. "Just humor me, run a full panel, and if you see anything weird, call me immediately." He nodded and slid on gloves. Minutes stretched into hours as machines hummed, pipettes clicked, and anticipation lay thick in the air. My mind raced through the possibilities. Was I being paranoid? Had my mother-in-law really tried in her own warped way to drug me? Or was this all the residue of too many strained family dinners and my own anxieties run wild? Every so often Jason glanced up from a batch of vials and gave me that look, half concern, half professional detachment. When the results finally came in, Jason slid a printout across the table. His voice was gentle, but every syllable seemed to echo. "Benzodiazepine. There's enough in here to knock out a grown adult, or at least muddle them up for a few hours. Julian, this isn't over-the-counter stuff. Someone dosed that drink on purpose." Standing there, everything inside me hardened into a cold understanding. The evidence was scientific, irrefutable, no longer just paranoia or suspicions gnawing at the edge of a family portrait. This was an act, a deliberate attempt to erase my memory or leave me altered during one of the most important nights in Diane's home. Crushes of anger and disappointment crashed through my chest, but I kept steady. I asked Jason, "Keep this between us for now. I need time to figure out what to do next and how to protect Haley from getting caught in the blast." He understood, promising silence and a copy of the full report for my records. The next few days turned into an unofficial investigation. Each family gathering, every phone call, every offhand comment from Diane or Gerald felt loaded like a test, a measurement of whether I knew. I started digging in ways I never thought I would, reviewing Diane's pharmacy history through a mutual acquaintance in the medical field, discovering more than one prescription for Xanax, for nerves, tracing rumors swirling in her bridge club about bizarre behavior and lost jewelry, connecting dots that, in any other context, would simply look like quirks of an anxious matriarch. Now though, with a toxicology report in my pocket, they looked like footprints leading to the truth. My photo work background taught me to look for patterns, notice what's out of place. A locked drawer, a receipt from the pharmacy left peeking out of a purse, a startled look from Diane each time the topic of food or drink arose at family events. I tracked these like evidence markers at a crime scene, letting the tension grow within me as I waited for the right moment to lay everything out. Showdown, the forced confession. The day I chose to confront Diane was not random, it was planned, an almost clinical calculation born from weeks of carrying the burden of what I knew. This wasn't going to be a stormy dinner table outburst or an ugly family brawl. No, this was chess, not checkers, psychological warfare under the guise of routine. When Diane asked, rather blithely, that I take a new headshot for her online profile, I realized the universe had handed me the perfect opening. The patio light knifed through the kitchen blinds that afternoon as I set my equipment down and pulled the carefully shielded folder from my bag. Diane hovered by the counter in a cardigan the color of tarragon, composure as unyielding as always. I could feel the tension crackling between us, a taut wire ready to snap. Instead of unpacking my camera, I slid the printouts, the toxicology report, the lab paperwork, and a copy of Jason's private note across the polished granite. "I need you to look at these," I said quietly. Her eyes flicked to them, then back to me, calculating, sharp, almost rehearsed in their skepticism. "What is this supposed to mean, Julian?" she asked, voice sweetly brittle but tinged with dread. I let the silence hang like the heavy southern humidity. "It's your handwriting on the pharmacy receipt, Diane, it's your prescription. It's a chemical fingerprint for benzodiazepines that matches the residue on the glass you served me, only I didn't drink it. There are people who could do something with this, if I wanted. I just want the truth. Tonight, you tell Gerald, you both set the record straight and you stop interfering in our lives, or I tell Haley everything, this time with proof." I laid out the lines in an even, neutral tone, a world away from the emotional wreck I'd become in the weeks prior. Her poise splintered just for a second, the micro-expressions flickering over her features, alarm, then incredulity, and finally anger, as if I had defied some natural order she steered. "You're mistaken," she tried to insist. "You're twisting things, Julian. I was only trying to make peace in my family." "You were trying to control it," I interrupted quietly. I wanted no part of the performance. "This is your choice. You own what you did, or I blow up the last shred of trust left in this house. Haley will see all of it." A brutal, silent stalemate stretched between us. Diane's lips trembled. Fury warred with fear in her eyes. Would she gamble that I was bluffing, or admit at last that her perfectionism had crossed a boundary most families never even imagine? Breaths shallow, she seemed to weigh her limited options, but I refused to break the stare. After a tense, endless moment, I quietly packed up my folders without a word about the headshots I'd been invited here to take. She knew this was not a request, but a declaration of final boundaries. I left the house without another photo, nor a backward glance, the air thick with the knowledge that after today, nothing in the Mercer household would ever return to how it was before. The balance of power and the truth had finally shifted. Storms of marriage and an unwanted gift. The aftermath of that forced confession rippled through our marriage with the subtlety of a hurricane. If the drama of the Mercer house had always been measured in microaggressions and whispered judgments, now it was a thunderclap. The day after I confronted Diane, I felt the weight of familial wreckage tightening around me. Haley's silence was heavier than any accusation. Diane wasted no time. Pain tends to travel fast in the South. She called Haley in tears, weaponizing victimhood, tangling the truth in a web of half-spoken fears and wounded pride. "He's trying to turn you against us. He's manipulating everything." I never got to hear the full conversation, and maybe that's for the best. What I did hear was the slam of our bedroom door, followed by muffled, choked sobs. The person I needed most to stand beside me, the person I trusted, was suddenly unreachable, adrift in a storm of loyalty and betrayal. For days, the house became foreign territory. Haley would leave early, come home late, and avoid me with the precision of a surgeon. Every passing glance felt like it was weighed against years of memories and all the fresh wounds of our ruined trust. My explanations, calm, documented, relentless, collided with her need to believe that the fault lines in her family could somehow be repaired or ignored. It's hard to be angry with someone who is simply grieving the loss of their family's image. It's even harder when you're the reason that illusions shattered. The Mercers, sensing blood in the water, circled in their own way. Gerald left voicemails, cold and clipped. "What did you think you'd accomplish, son? This hurt Haley, not us." At work, rumors started to swirl. In tight-knit communities, a family name carries echoing power. Diane and Gerald knew how to pull those strings. What I didn't expect, though, was the gift that soon arrived, unasked for, and wrapped in all the wrong intentions. A week after everything crumbled, Gerald requested a peace talk over coffee at the country club. The gesture reeked of damage control, not reconciliation. He pushed a manila envelope across the table toward me. Inside, legal documents for a trust fund in Haley's name, the deed to a starter home in Asheville. No strings attached, supposedly, but every line might as well have been a chain. Gerald's speech was measured, almost bored. "You've made your point. All we want is for Haley to have peace and stability. Maybe this will help keep things civil." I stared at the paperwork, feeling both victorious and disgusted. The house, the money, these things were salt for a wound that would never heal the way Gerald thought. I handed the envelope back. "You can't buy back respect, Gerald, and you can't fix this with property lines." But there it was, a marriage shaken, a gift neither of us had wanted, and yet part of the legacy, the Mercer legacy, that would haunt us whether we accepted it or not. The real battle, I realized, would be not just surviving the Mercers' games, but recovering the trust with Haley, rebuilding on ground that had never been level to begin with. Irrefutable evidence and unexpected allies. The slow unraveling of secrets had left me feeling more alone than ever, isolated in a house that no longer felt like home, and a marriage haunted by a silence I couldn't fix with words. Each night I replayed the confrontation in my head and tried in vain to draw comfort from the technical certainty of lab printouts and forensic proof. The problem was, evidence is useless if the person you need most refuses to see it for what it is. I was adrift, balancing between anger and sorrow, the ache of holding both the truth and the fallout. That changed on a cold Thursday morning. The mail slid through the antique slot with the usual thud, but that day an unmarked padded envelope waited atop the bills and advertisements. Inside was a small, nondescript USB drive wrapped in a neon sticky note with my name, nothing else. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned it over and over in my palm, suspicions already blooming. There was only one person who even knew enough to use my nickname, written in messily familiar handwriting, Vanessa. I waited until Haley left for work that morning before shutting myself in my study, drawing the curtains tight. My hands shook as I plugged in the USB drive. What I saw in the folder was labeled only with a date, the same night as Diane's birthday dinner. I clicked through several folders, security camera files. One short video was shakily labeled, Kitchen, 8:37 p.m. I forced myself to watch. The familiar figures came into frame, Diane, her movements sharp and nervous, and then me, blurred, moving stiffly, holding the tray of glasses. The camera caught something my own eyes could not that night, Diane slipping a small glass vial from her apron and adding its colorless contents to a crystal goblet. It was unmistakable, even on grainy home security footage. I pressed pause and exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. There was more. I found another video, time-stamped just after the incident in the dining room, this time audio-enabled. Diane's voice, brittle with panic, hissed at Gerald. "Why did you drink from the wrong glass? Everything would have been simpler if you just listened." Gerald tried to shush her, but his words were clear enough. "This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't decided to handle things, just like before." There were scraps of a larger story here, mention of trouble with Owen and Vanessa in years past, a cryptic reference to steering Haley away from bad matches. At that moment, the truth shifted from private paranoia to concrete, invisible, but undeniable. I realized I was not the first target of Diane's intervention. The evidence in my hands could destroy her narrative, could help me reclaim my marriage or at the very least defend my sanity. I picked up my phone and dialed Vanessa, my fingers trembling on the keys. Her voice, when she answered, was threaded through with nerves and relief. "I thought you needed to see it," she whispered after a long silence. She admitted she'd held onto the backup security files after a similar debacle 2 years earlier, when she and Owen nearly split over rumors Diane had seeded, manipulating Owen into mistrusting her loyalty. The sense of gratitude, I could have wept with it. For the first time I realized that the house of cards Diane and Gerald had built was already beginning to collapse from within. Vanessa offered solidarity, her voice steady as she confessed, "I know what it's like to stand in the crosshairs. You're not alone, Julian. Not anymore." With this evidence and a new ally, the next step was clear. The battle for the truth could finally be fought in the open, and this time, the Mercers wouldn't be able to hide behind polite smiles or whispered slander. Revealing the truth, living room war in America. Sunday evening arrived with a weight I could feel in my chest. The house was spotless, every surface gleaming as if Diane herself had prepped for a magazine shoot rather than an unexpected family confrontation. I'd texted Owen and Vanessa earlier asking them to join us for a family dinner. The message was vague enough to arouse no suspicion, at least, that's what I hoped. My palms sweated as I set the table, every clink of silverware a countdown to the moment the facade would shatter. Owen and Vanessa showed up first. Haley, still guarded but curious after a week heavy with my silent brooding, moved between the kitchen and the hallway, shooting me questioning looks I couldn't answer just yet. Diane and Gerald finally joined in, one in a pastel suit, her smile sharp at the corners, and the other in a stiff-collared shirt, carrying the air of a man about to perform at a boardroom, not a family meal. We settled at the dinner table, polite small talk slipping through the cracks, each word weighed down by underlying tension. I waited until all plates were filled, and the shallow chorus of forks and knives on porcelain had dulled into a wary quiet. "I need to show everyone something important," I said, my voice nearly steady. All eyes swiveled toward me. I reached into my messenger bag and connected my laptop to the house TV, snapped open the folder labeled with the date of Diane's birthday dinner, and, against the rapid-fire protest swelling in Diane's eyes, clicked play on the first video file. The footage was grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. There was Diane in the kitchen, hands shaking as she uncapped a small vial and poured its contents into a crystal glass set aside from the others. The silence was instant, suffocating. Diane's traditional bravado evaporated. Even Gerald's grip on his steak knife loosened. Owen's chair creaked, and Vanessa covered her mouth, audibly gasping. In the background, my own blurred figure entered to collect the glasses, a fact that drew an even sharper collective inhale. The next video played a muffled audio stream, Diane whisper shouting at Gerald, "Why did you drink from the wrong glass? Everything would have been simpler if you'd just listened." Haley stared at the footage, her hand halfway to her face as disbelief gave way to shock, then settled in betrayal. Owen, usually Diane's loyal defender, looked at his mother as if seeing a stranger. Gerald, for the first time I could remember, shrunk in his seat. Diane attempted denial, her voice too high and frantic, blaming stress, spinning wild accusations, but the evidence was there. Vanessa, emboldened, recounted her own run-ins with Diane's manipulations, and I let her speak, grateful for the corroboration my heart desperately needed. Haley's voice finally cut through the chaos. She stood from the table, her chair scraping sharply across the floor. "From today on," she said, voice trembling but resolute, "my life is my own, no more secrets, no more control." Diane crumpled, the denial gone, her posture a mixture of defeat and quiet horror. Gerald simply stared at the tabletop. In that living room, under the glare of recessed lighting and Southern family portraits, the old order found itself overturned by a handful of shaky video and the courage to call things what they were. I looked at Haley, her eyes wet, uncertain, but lit from within by something undeniable. For once in this house, the truth, raw, ugly, impossible to ignore, belonged to us. New limits and moments of belief. In the months that followed the explosive living room confrontation, everything in our lives seemed to recalibrate. The old patterns didn't snap back into place. If anything, a fragile new order began to emerge, defined by boundaries that had never truly existed before. For the first time, Haley and I didn't simply drift along on the tides set by her parents. Every interaction now became a quiet negotiation of respect, distance, and trust. Diane and Gerald retreated, at first gracelessly and later with a kind of forced politeness. Their texts shifted from daily check-ins to rare stilted messages. "Hope you two are well. Thinking of you." We declined most invitations in those early months, wary of being swept up in old games. I could sense that Gerald, though wounded, was already strategizing, trying to find a new path to regain control. He invited me for lunch at the club, ostensibly a gesture of reconciliation, but draped in questions about my career and veiled remarks about taking care of family. I turned him down, my voice steadier than I felt. Respect works both ways now, Gerald. I'm not up for sale. The real transformation, though, happened in our home. Haley, so long buffeted by competing loyalties, finally staked her claim. One quiet evening, as she stood by our fireplace, she picked up my hand and told me, voice soft but certain, "This can never happen again. They lost the right to dictate how we live. We won't let our child grow up like that." Hearing her say that, really say it and mean it, released something in me I hadn't realized was still clenched. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about us, about the family we were becoming on our own terms. The months blurred together, nervous, sometimes bittersweet, always deliberate. We agreed. Holidays would be on our turf or not at all, and decisions about our future belonged strictly to us. When Gerald dangled yet another opportunity, an offer to help set up a trust for our future baby, I asked, gently but firmly, that all gifts come without expectation or even cease entirely. I could almost hear the iron thump of old inherited pride behind his brittle laugh. Diane's attempts at reconciliation came in strange forms. Once she left flower bouquets and handwritten cards on our porch, her apologies wound tight with phrases like, "Forgive my mistakes," but never directly naming them. It was as though she couldn't quite say the words, but she knew she'd crossed a line. Despite mistrust lingering in the air, Haley and I made the decision to meet her halfway, for our daughter's sake, if not for healing her parents' egos. We allowed them into our lives, but always on our terms. The most pivotal moment arrived one blue-skied afternoon, months after the scandal. Haley and I sat on our back patio, her belly rounded with new life, when she squeezed my hand and whispered, "We get to define what family means now." I felt a lightness then, a cautious, hard-won relief. Our little family at last had a chance to grow up safe from the shadow of others' manipulation. We set house rules, polite, concrete, and non-negotiable. No surprise visits, no unsolicited advice, and above all, no more meddling. Gerald and Diane bristled at first, but over time they adapted. Doors that had once been slammed were now open only by invitation, and our home was our own fortress. The first holiday under these new rules felt both jubilant and tense. Diane and Gerald arrived punctually, bearing gifts and cautious pleasantries. They played with their granddaughter, snapped obligatory photos, but gone was the air of judgment or control. Diane hesitated at times as though waiting for permission before hugging Haley or holding the baby. Each gesture, however tentative, spoke volumes. Gerald commented less on my work and more on the weather. There were awkward silences, but also small bursts of genuine laughter from Haley that I hadn't heard in years. Through it all, I realized that trusting someone again felt a little like learning to walk on new legs, uneasy, effortful, but not impossible. It was a day-by-day process. Haley and I celebrated small victories, a holiday without drama, a visit that ended in gratitude rather than rivalry, the simple pleasure of sipping coffee together before dawn with our daughter cooing nearby. The old wounds weren't miraculously healed. Sometimes I still found myself tense when my phone buzzed with Diane's number, or when Gerald sent a clipped email. But the difference now was who we allowed into our inner circle. We'd learned the power of saying no, of protecting our space, of insisting that love meant freedom, not fear. One quiet Sunday, as the light shifted gold through the window and our family played on the living room rug, I caught a look in Haley's eyes. Tired, yes, but glimmering with trust. For a long time it had seemed like the Mercers' influence might fracture us for good. Instead, somehow, their very overreach had taught us why lines matter, and how beautiful life can be when you finally get to draw them yourself. Choose to live life on your own terms. After everything, the betrayals, the confrontations, and the reluctant truces, there came a quiet, unmistakable shift. No one announced it. No line was drawn in permanent ink. Instead, the new order arrived softly, almost imperceptibly, in the choices we made every single day. It was in the way Haley and I woke up side by side each morning, no longer bracing for the next wave of Mercer interference, but ready, if still a little guarded, to build something that belonged just to us. Gerald's gift of a house and trust fund for our daughter might have once felt like an olive branch. But to us, it read as a monument to the old way of doing things. Success measured in assets, love rationed through ownership, peace bought, or so we thought, with property deeds and bank statements. We accepted the house but not the strings, clear with each other that this was a tool, not a tether. If anything, opening the door to that house was a lesson. What mattered wasn't where we lived, but how we filled those rooms, with laughter, not secrets, with family traditions of our own creation, not obligations inherited from a playbook we'd never agreed to. Diane and Gerald's visits, when they happened, were held on our terms. Sometimes they sat stiffly, sometimes they softened, but always the message was the same. Here, in these walls, our rules would reign. The first time they came to meet Eliza at the hospital, there was a hush about them. I saw a blend of pride and surrender in Gerald's face. In Diane, a resignation laced with some quiet, unfamiliar humility. She smiled for the camera but didn't offer advice or critique. She held our daughter for just a moment, then returned her gently, as though finally understanding what it meant for something so precious to be not hers to shape, but ours to protect. As the months passed, that lesson deepened. I held my first gallery show and saw them arrive together, standing solemn amidst the local artists and old family friends. They offered a simple congratulations, a handshake from Gerald, a soft "well done, Julian" from Diane before slipping out quietly, leaving the spotlight for me and Haley. Their presence was unobtrusive, their absence even less of a threat. Any remaining tension lingered mostly in memory, not in daily life. Haley and I talked often about what success really meant. For us, it wasn't the approval of her parents, or the reassurance of financial stability handed down. It was the ability to make choices, sometimes stubborn, sometimes clumsy, but always ours. It was about fighting for honest conversations, for love free of manipulation, for small daily acts of loyalty and courage. We made a point to celebrate not only big milestones, Eliza's first steps, my published photo essays, but the ordinary blessings of burning toast together, of rocking our daughter to sleep on stormy nights, of laughing about inside jokes the Mercers would never quite get. We didn't erase the scars. Old wounds twinged at holidays, and sometimes a look from Diane would trigger a memory of battles lost and won. But each time, Haley and I found ourselves stronger, our bond thickened by what we'd endured. The meaning of family, once defined by gatekeeping and control, had evolved. It was now an act of mutual choice, a daily renewal of faith in one another. The Mercers had to find their place within those boundaries, or not. Their happiness, their definition of pride, no longer dictated ours. Looking back, I realized the hardest won victories are the ones invisible to the world. No one will write headlines about a family learning finally to let go. But as I listened to Eliza's laughter echo in a home built by our choices, not their conditions, I knew that the life we shaped was not just survival, but a quiet, stubborn act of joy. In the end, choosing to live life on our own terms wasn't just about breaking free from the Mercers' legacy, it was about creating a legacy of our own, one our daughter could inherit, unburdened, undictated, joyfully hers.